Thanks for stopping by. I've been interested in horror recently. It's the ultimate hit or miss genre in pretty much every type of media. I think this is due to many factors. The range of enjoyment depends heavily on the person. Some enjoy being on edge while watching supernatural horror, while others like the thrill of a slasher movie with a charismatic villain. I like a pretty wide range of horror subgenres, but my favorite is psychological. That being said, I can count on one hand the games and movies in the psychological horror genre that I actually like. It's really easy to fuck it up. For me, I often need good characters and a fleshed out story so I can empathize with the terror these characters feel. But it also can't be some pretentious garbage that takes hours to even get a grasp on a basic theme. These are really important for this type of horror because even if the movie or game I'm experiencing ends up not terrifying me, I can still experience a good story. It's hard to pull off horror that is both terrifying and has a meaningful plot and well-written characters. Personally, I don't get scared easily, so I'm almost always gauging the quality of horror in the same framework as everything else. Well, recently, I experienced a game that surprised me. A psychological horror game not popular outside of visual novel circles that ended up being the scariest game I've ever played. A game that will shock you to the core and disturb you deeply while also being intelligent and thought-provoking. Saya no Uda is a visual novel developed by Nitro Plus in 2003 and written and directed by Gen Urabochi, who actually went on to write a lot of well-known anime series, such as Psycho Pass and Madoka Magica. His works are all pretty fucking dark, but surprisingly, he never pushed the boundaries farther than one of his first projects. To get into the darkest corners of Urabochi's mind, you have to do a little bit of digging. And what's crazy about Saya no Uda is, it hits every single note I mentioned in the introduction, while also being relatively obscure. Compared to games like Outlast and Amnesia, it has a fraction of notoriety, while being equally as accessible as those two. I'm making this video to first give a review and explain why any horror fan should play it, and after that, go into a spoiler section and go into an analysis. With that being said, let's dive deep into the abyss. Fuminori is a high school student who got into a violent car crash, killing his whole family. Miraculously, Fuminori survived the accident. The probability of such being so low, you would think that God chose to save him personally. But when Fuminori wakes up from his coma, he is struck by an incomprehensible fear. A reality that would break any human's mind. The world around you is made of flesh, organs, worms, anything vile you can think of. It doesn't even look like hell. And that's because it's not hell. You're still alive, and this is the exact hospital room that you were transported to. But after waking up, this is how you see the world. Everything feels slimy, and your nose is constantly filled with the disgusting stench of rotten meat. This is not a nightmare. This is reality for Fuminori. After several months in the hospital, keeping this condition to himself, Fuminori is released and tries to return to a normal life in this new flesh world. Of course, almost no human could handle this reality without breaking. Most people would probably kill themselves or somehow end up in a psych ward. But Fuminori has really tried to be resilient. He's reunited with his friends, going to school, and living at his family's house alone. Of course, how long can a man take this? And why does he choose to continue living in this hell world? This is a simple yet unique concept. However, it's one of the many effective types of horror that Saya no Uda consists of. On its face, it looks like strictly body horror, or horror based on disturbing visuals regarding the human body or biological organisms. But along with this comes cosmic, existential, and most prominently, psychological horror. This is strictly a story experience. Even for a visual novel, this game has almost no actual gameplay. Most visual novels either give you a lot of choices that lead to different story paths, or have soft gameplay elements like detective work or searching for items. Saya no Uda has 2 moments where the player gets a choice in anything. You're almost entirely on rails, waiting to see where this journey takes you. Each path leads to disaster. The title screen is deceptive. It really doesn't tell you anything. If you haven't seen anything about this game, you have no idea what the hell you're about to play. When you start the game, you are immediately sucker punched by this. This is your introduction to Saya no Uda, a disgusting demon spewing unrecognizable verbal filth at you. Fuminori's terrifying perception of the world isn't a plot twist. This is how the game starts. These creatures are actually his lifelong friends. He's been seeing them in this way for a few months. Somehow, Fuminori has gotten a grasp on interacting with these monsters. He has to try his hardest to see people as humans still, and even then, no amount of effort will allow someone to fully adapt. This flesh room covered in meat chairs resembles the cafeteria. After Fuminori declines a ski trip offer by his friend group, the game switches to his friend's perspective. The same scene is shown, but in the normal world. Here, we're introduced to the actual bodies of Fuminori's friends, and the cafeteria from the perspective of everybody else. Saya no Uda consistently switches between the normal world and the hell world, based on whose perspective is being shown. Also, the game is narrated in first person during Fuminori's perspective, and third person when it's from anybody else's. It draws a clear distinction between the sane, rational person's worldview and the worldview of a person subjected to this torture. Fuminori's friends, Yo, Koji, and Omi, have a hard time connecting with Fuminori right now. He's very distant, and doesn't speak to them or look at them normally. They know something is seriously wrong with him, but attribute it to trauma after the car accident. Fuminori never tells them what's really going on. He keeps it to himself, so he doesn't stay trapped in a hospital or institution for the rest of his life. These relationships play a key role in the story. After the friend group discusses Fuminori's mental state, you get to witness Fumi's session with Ryoko, practically his counselor from a normal world perspective. Fuminori has to get regular checkups at the hospital. With such a terrible condition, it's surprising to see that no matter how many MRIs are done on his brain, there is nothing abnormal visible. The surgeons and therapists cannot help him. He is all alone in his suffering. He pretends everything is okay, and pivots to a topic about a man named Dr. Ogai. It's unclear why he's interested in asking about another doctor during a counseling session. It's also unclear why Ryoko was stumbling, trying to avoid giving details. This is one of the first mysteries the player wants to uncover, besides the obvious. How did Fuminori end up like this? After the appointment, you enter the flesh world perspective with Fuminori's thoughts narrating. This is when I started to feel truly terrible for him, as it's really hard to not feel empathy for a man being put through this. He tries his best to be clear-headed and understanding, despite walking through the hallway made of pig guts. He is aware that the hospital walls are white and that the doctors here are admirable people. He's thankful that the doctors did all they could do for him. He reflects on the possibilities of how his conditions came to be and tries his best to have a level-headed, rational view of the world by visualizing it in his mind. But as you see, after he steps out and begins his walk home, there is something most likely holding all of this together. One singular thread that allows him to behave and think somewhat rationally still. One singular thread that keeps his moral compass intact. One singular thread that keeps him from ending his life and allows him to continue living in this hell world. It is revealed when Fuminori opens the door to his bloody, empty home. A haunting, yet beautiful melody starts playing, as he is greeted by Saya.
遅かったね。ちょっと心配しちゃったぞ。
The only person in this world that does not trigger his cognitive disorder, Fuminori has developed a romantic and sensational love for this person. A girl with the appearance of a young teenager. In many contexts, this relationship would appear disgusting, but for a man who lives in hell, she is his salvation, his reason for living, and the person who seemingly sacrifices a normal life to live with a man with a terrible condition and a broken mind. At this point, you share the sickness of Fuminori as you play. You're seeing this disgusting world and understanding why Fuminori has to cling on to this girl to survive. It really messes with your head as the player, and it's hard not to feel extremely depressed witnessing this. In fact, this part of the game shows just how fucked up this man's life is, with tons of factors playing into it, like the fact that Fuminori and Saya have ran through multiple paint combinations to find one that can replace the pink and red walls in their room. The nasty paint-ridden walls, the dinner Saya makes for him tasting absolutely rotten despite it being normal food, and the constant darkness from the windows being painted over. He can't live in a normal environment, can barely eat, and can't even feel comfortable in his own home. And you can only imagine how deranged Fuminori's home would look from outside of his perspective. After some discussion at the dinner table, the day ends with the two having sex. It's quite a disturbing scene. First off, the images are extremely uncomfortable. But also, Fuminori is reflecting on how and why Saya would ever love somebody like him. All alone in his suffering, he grows increasingly guilty about her staying. It's heartbreaking, because you can understand why he would constantly need validation from her. If she left, his world would be over. But who is Saya? Why is she the only one that appears normal? The first day sets the stage for Saya no Uda. It's a great introduction to the characters and the dynamics that will make up the upcoming horror show. As early as the second day, everything goes off the rails. So I'm gonna leave the story at that for the people who want to play on their own. Before the second segment, I want to review the brilliant music and presentation. The story unfolds in a simple text box. Backgrounds switch between the environment, character portraits, and illustrations of events. Besides the innocent look of Saya, the art style of the characters is, let's say, rougher and more realistic than the typical style seen in VNs. They're more reminiscent of something like a Dark Horse comic book, rather than a Japanese anime. Close-up shots on the characters really bring out their facial expressions. There's this trope I'm not the biggest fan of when it comes to horror VNs, where the characters are drawn in a colorful or cute style we associate with anime, but act psychotic and commit violent acts. It's been overdone in my opinion, and I'm glad Saya decided to make the characters more raw looking. The cutout portraits are somewhat crude, but the fully drawn scenes are really expressive and well drawn. There's plenty of memorable scenes because of this. When it comes to the backgrounds, they're very different styles depending on the perspective. From Fuminori's, you'll see various locations distorted in some type of nasty way. Somehow, the CG really worked here. A lack of natural lighting makes this world extremely unnerving, almost like the light emanates from the flesh itself. Everything from the telephone poles to tables blend in, making each object look meshed together. It's one disgusting flesh body that morphs and protrudes to imitate the environment in the real world. If you get squeamish seeing organs, just prepare yourself if you play this game. Some scenes with Fuminori and Saya have a black background, highlighting the characters. These scenes exude loneliness and emptiness, especially the 18+ scenes. You really see how Fuminori and Saya are the only things that matter to each other. The rest of the world doesn't exist in these moments, and doesn't need to. The pleasure they feel is isolated as the only reason for these two to live. In the real world, backgrounds are sometimes detailed, to show the position of characters in drawn scenes, but during most of the dialogue, the portraits are in front of a subtle background, resembling the room the conversation is taking place in, but it's blurred, smudged, or filtered in some way. They look like watercolor paintings. Lots of the filters make the world feel dull and melancholic. There are very few backgrounds with any life, and for some reason, these contributed to how sad I felt playing as Fuminori's friends. The music is incredible in the context of Saya no Uda. There are 3 general types. In the normal world, the empty melodies you hear keep you in a state of melancholy. These eerie themes loom over most interactions, never letting you feel cozy.
あれは本当にちょっと遠すぎてる。ひょっとしたら変質狂か何かかもしれんな。
In contrast, the soundtrack during gruesome and shocking moments is this intense cacophony. Tracks like Schizophrenia really emphasize the insanity in scenes, like this. I've never heard a guitar make such gut-wrenching sounds. This song is the embodiment of panic and fear in audio form. I genuinely feel sick listening to these tracks. Finally, the tracks that play in the flesh world when Saya and Fuminori are together made me feel emotions I've never felt from music. Colorful synths and a soft, high-pitched choir are paired to make these melodies that are both beautiful and sinister at the same time. It sounds so ethereal, but you can't help but feel some malicious energy underneath it all. Here, listen and see if you understand what I'm saying. I might be bad at explaining it, but there's something twisted about these themes. They do an excellent job at portraying the love Saya and Fuminori have for each other, while ultimately acknowledging how fucked up this relationship really is. Sometimes this Silent Hill, My Heaven-esque noise pops in and screws up whatever pleasant feeling you have listening. It's almost like the game is telling you, wait, are you forgetting how insane this shit is? Why do you feel so comfortable watching this relationship, knowing how sick it really is? Especially during the sex scenes, you can't help but feel disgusted and entranced at the same time. This music encapsulates those feelings. So, to any horror fan who hasn't played Saya no Uda, go check it out. If this review got you interested, awesome. You're not even ready for how batshit insane that story gets, and I hope it quenches that thirst for something that genuinely scares you. I know how difficult that hunt is, but you don't have to look any further for a while. Come back when you're done if you want to see my deeper analysis. For people that have already played Saya no Uda and want to see how I interpreted the themes or want to hear my personal perspective on things, stay for part 2. That also goes for people who aren't gonna play it, whether it sounds too disturbing or if you just don't have time. If you want to see this game's substance and look into the juicy bits, relax and enjoy. Okay, so I am not going to go over the entire story. That would take too long and be pretty much meaningless considering my goal with part 2. I'm gonna start with covering themes and deeper concepts of the game. Then, I'm gonna analyze my favorite scenes and aspects of the story, and to end it, lay out my criticisms of the game. Note that this is all gonna come from my personal opinion, and that I'm going off my own interpretations. How one interprets this game is highly subjective. My analysis may be very different from another's. One of the most commonly understood themes of Saya no Uda is moral relativism. The idea of the morality of an action or a person depending on which standpoint you look at it from. In one man's eyes, an act may be considered good, while another may see it as evil. Lots of people nowadays identify with this concept, I think. Many factors can influence how moral an action is. If an act is seen as evil in today's society, would somebody committing that act 100 years ago be immoral? What if it was seen as a good act back then? If society influenced that person to commit that act and told them it was okay, did they have evil intentions? Or, the classic example, is a poor person stealing from a rich person equally immoral as a rich person stealing from a poor person? Moral judgment is often influenced by the circumstances, and Sayano Uda pushes this concept to its absolute limit. Because although Fuminori and Saya commit horrific and violent acts throughout the story, you somehow empathize with them, or possibly not even see them as immoral at all. For the first part of the story, Fuminori was the protagonist. I really respected him for all the effort he put into keeping his composure. He tried his ass off to see his friends as human, go to school, and be grateful for the doctors that saved his life. You want him to return to the real world and be okay. You're kind of happy that Saya keeps him going. But day 2, his friend Yo wants to have a serious talk. Yo has a crush on Fuminori and asked him out a few months ago. He said he needed time to think it over, but then the car crash happened. Since then, Yo hasn't brought it up. She's also worried about his general mental state. Catching him after school, she expresses how much she cares and wants him to open up. Remember, Fuminori is a complete shut-in and avoids everybody. His crew doesn't even know what he does every day, or how he's living. When confronted, Fuminori only sees this gross demon, asking a bunch of questions and invading his privacy. This is when he finally snaps. He can't pretend to see humans anymore. But instead of keeling over scared, he ruthlessly insults her, says how much he hates her, mocks her love for him. She breaks down crying, bewildered at how sudden this outburst was from a lifelong friend. Fuminori smiles. He's happy. He finally got back at these vile creatures for haunting him every day. After being scared for so long, he got to show them how he feels about them. He got to show his dominance. From Yo's perspective, Fuminori is a piece of shit. Omi, who hid and watched the interaction, was infuriated. Me, as the player, felt shocked too. It's hard not to be appalled at how mean he was. But from Fuminori's perspective, this was none of that. After this interaction, Fuminori decides to treat these beings as what they are, monsters. He accepts that people will look, smell, and sound like monsters for the rest of his life, and they should be treated as such. And what he plans to do is abhorrent, something the lowest of the low would do. But in his eyes, it is what must be done to live a peaceful life. Fuminori plans to murder his friends, get them off his back so he never has to interact with these creatures that constantly invade his privacy again. Sayano Uda's shift from his perspective and everybody else's makes you really challenge your moral system. You will constantly be questioning how you feel. In the real world, Fuminori is a sadistic villain, but it's possible the player will see him as the hero. I've seen quite a few people who empathize with Fuminori throughout the whole story. Adapting to this hell world requires a complete change in your moral compass. Fuminori is forced to stop considering how others feel and has to abandon the very essence of what it means to be human: empathy. When empathy doesn't play into your moral system anymore, so many more actions can be justified. Killing people is now morally neutral. Saya is also hard to pin down morally. She's not a human. She's a creation who appears as a little girl in the flesh world, but is actually an amorphous monster. This experimental creature is ridiculously powerful and intelligent and has the ability to warp people's senses permanently. But emotionally, she's extremely immature. She doesn't really understand why humans are terrified of her, and doesn't seem to realize how wrong her actions actually are. She stalks people, kills people, and brings them to the hell dimension without understanding how these actions go against human morality. But the question follows, is she really immoral? She's not even a human. She's the first in her own species raised by a mad doctor. To her, this is just survival, like what we say when we eat a chicken or a cow. Her perspective on the world isn't even close to ours, and her actions rewarded her with a lover, someone who doesn't see her as a monster. It's sad that Fuminori became the way he is due to unfortunate circumstances out of his control. For me personally, I question whether Fuminori was a villain or not until that scene, which leads to the second theme explored, the loss of humanity. One day, Saya has a surprise for Fuminori when he gets home, Yo, in human form. Saya decides to give Fuminori some company by bringing Yo into the flesh world. When Fumi first sees a normal-looking Yo crying on the floor, there's a glimmer of guilt. I really thought he was going to finally realize how fucked up Saya is after seeing his ex-best friend mind-broken, unable to even speak. But after being told that this was a present for him and that Saya was just trying to make him happy, Fuminori happily accepts the gift. There's no turning back for Fuminori. He has become absolutely deranged. Seeing her as a pet, Fuminori and Saya decide to rape Yo. And here, you realize, Fuminori lost the ability to see humans as humans anymore. His mind has become so warped, and he's so ingrained in this new life that he can't return to having empathy. It's hard to watch Yo go through this. The lack of regard and guilt felt by Fuminori isn't even seen in the worst of video game villains. He even briefly reflects on this afterwards and acknowledges how he'll never be the man he once was. But he quickly discards these thoughts as his concerns lie with his lover. At this point, I considered Fuminori evil. His moral compass has shifted to such an extent that it's impossible for me to see him as a human in a philosophical sense. It's a popular belief that our empathy and our ability to connect with others defines us as humans. The human experience is much more than survival. We want to influence the world, be with our loved ones, and continue striving for a meaningful life. Fuminori lost the ability to achieve any of these, and in those circumstances, made one little girl his reason to live. His obsession with Saya encompasses his whole life, his meaning, his purpose, his satisfaction, his fulfillment, and he wants nothing else. And because he doesn't care about being the best person he can be anymore, doesn't care about connecting with others or learning about the world, it all becomes a nuisance to him. I can draw parallels to real life as well, probably pretty bad, but when one's entire dream is power, money, or a partner, have you noticed how these people may throw out their values to achieve those? So, in his obsession with Saya, Fuminori decided not to try anymore, not even attempt to be human. When you're willing to sacrifice the people you're closest to, you have lost your humanity. And this game shows how this process begins, and what one becomes in the end. You can also see this concept during the scene where Fumi's neighbor is pulled into the flesh world. He instantly goes mad and reverts to the most primal, animalistic version of a human. When a human is at the very bottom of their hierarchy of needs, they become motivated strictly off of biology and instinct. He kills his family out of fear and ends up sexually assaulting Saya without even thinking about it. He instantly lost the family he cherishes and the home he loves. When everything with meaning in your life vanishes, it's very possible you'll lose your mind. It's interesting because the human experience has little to do with our actual biology. It's about something greater than that. So, while Fumi's neighbor is reacting based off of innate fight or flight instincts, most people would say that he lost his humanity at that moment. Saino Uda really explores the scary reality of how anybody, no matter how good of a person, can revert to the savage, uncivilized human we've evolved from. Saino Uda has depth. You are constantly questioning how you feel about certain characters and your own moral compass. By the end, I really wanted to see Koji take Fuminori down and live a peaceful life. I was disgusted at Fuminori's manipulative behavior, and I clenched my fist when he tricked Koji. But I also couldn't deny that under his circumstances, that I could potentially end up the same way. I say Saya no Uda is mainly a psychological horror because much of the fear comes from how the characters react to what happens. I felt the paranoia Omi was feeling walking into Fuminori's neglected, nasty house. I felt the fear Fumi's neighbor was feeling when his family came home and started spewing Zalgo words. I was scared of Fuminori's insanity during Yo's abuse. But the game also uses a lot of concepts established in the cosmic horror genre. H.P. Lovecraft's stories undoubtedly influenced Saya no Uda. For example, human helplessness when encountering a force far greater than your own. This is one of the most critical aspects of Lovecraftian horror, and I mean, yeah, the flesh world is the most unbeatable, unimaginable force you can possibly face. The concept of a discovery that once made will drive a person mad is all over the place in Lovecraft stories. Call of Cthulhu, The Shadow of Innsmouth, At the Mountains of Madness, all about the discovery of a force far beyond our strength and intelligence. The same appeal of these stories is present during Ryoko's discovery of Dr. Ogai's underground lab. Let me just say, that shit was so unsettling. When Ryoko told Koji not to look at the markings on the walls, my heart sunk. There's undoubtedly something not right. Something way too powerful has been discovered. Ryoko pieces together Ogai's diary, and the player gets to learn about what happened. And it dawns on you that Saya was a creation of man. That father she mentions frequently was this depraved doctor, isolated from society, obsessed with the creation of an advanced life form. Ironically, Ogai fell into the obsession with Saya as Fuminori did. Cosmic horror is also defined by how the creature is left ambiguous. This lets the reader use their imagination. In this instance, you imagine Saya's true form, knowing that her appearance breaks people's minds on sight. There's probably a lot more that I'm missing here, because I'm not too familiar with cosmic horror. If you guys know of any other Lovecraftian influences, please let me know in the comments. Alright, that was a lot, guys. Let's wrap this video up. Okay, so before my main critique, I'm gonna highlight some of my favorite scenes real quick. The Rainbow Room. Omi walks into Fuminori's dark living room and turns the lights on. Everything is smothered in all sorts of paint. Not sure why this one stuck to me. I think because from any perspective outside of Fumi's, there's no way to rationalize this shit. Without knowing what he's going through, you have to assume that he's lost his mind. The Rainbow Room is the embodiment of the word insanity, and the first time anybody in the story sees Fuminori's hidden life. Despite being a minor plot detail, it's an absolutely brilliant scene. The car ride is also worthy of notion. After the disappearance of Omi, Fuminori has been avoiding his friends even more. Koji becomes very suspicious of his behavior, but is hesitant about confronting him. Suddenly one day, Fuminori approaches Koji and asks him for a massive favor out of the blue. No small talk, no checking up on how Koji's doing. Fumi straight up just asks him for a 3-hour ride to the mountains. For some reason, he feels pressured into doing the favor, despite them drifting apart. The car ride there doesn't fix their shaky friendship, as Koji can't help but notice his old friend's weird malicious smile and vague comments about their destination. It's tense, uncomfortable, and filled me with dread, wondering what Fumi's plan was. Last one I want to talk about is the end fight scene, which was an absolute nail-biter. The grimy ambush by the two antagonists forces Koji to engage in one final melee duel. I didn't expect an action scene, but it was written really well. The final choice in this game determines the outcome, but both are intense. I just want to say that Koji is an awesome character. He's empathetic and caring, but by the end of all this madness, even he has a breaking point. His life has been ruined by his own best friend, and he has to put an end to this himself. It's time for my one major critique. The writing and plot are outstanding, but with Saya no Uda being relatively short, the endings needed to hit hard like the rest of the game. I'm just gonna say it. The Koji wins ending is way better than the Fuminori wins ending. In Koji wins, Ryoko intrudes the duel and blows Saya's body into pieces with ice-cold rounds. Her studying of Ogai's research gave her the key to beating Saya. Fuminori kills himself with an axe, out of sorrow. From that day, Koji lives with hallucinations of his old friends, has lucid nightmares, and has conversations with people that aren't even there. He's gone crazy. It's a really sad ending, probably one of the most depressing I've ever seen. But Koji, through strategy and planning, finally takes the antagonists down. He's lost everything. It's sheer determination to prevent Saya from ever bringing this chaos into anyone's life again. And this cost him his sanity. Despite how sad this ending made me, I still had someone to root for. It was a profound way to end, seeing a normal teen and counselor putting themselves at great risk to slay 2 serial killers for the better of humanity. So, on the other end, the villains win. An ending where the antagonists win could be interesting, but it's so hard to do. The best way to write this is to have the antagonist fall to the hero, but actually achieve their goal beforehand. This way, the ending isn't just pure nihilism. There's a deep impact the villain had on the protag or the world, and therefore, it seems like they really win in the end despite dying. Actually, the Koji ending is sort of like this, except Fumi didn't achieve his goal of a happy life with Saya, but the damage was definitely done. Saya and Fumi beat Koji, and Saya finally reaches her evolution Ogai wrote about. She gives birth to tons of amorphous life forms like her, and fulfills her biological purpose of reproduction. They rise to a higher plane of existence, a different dimension, as Ogai predicted this life form would do. They get to be together in a new world. In their eyes, it's heavenly, but this implies the destruction of the Earth as we know it. If you're empathetic to these two and wanted to see their love thrive throughout the entirety, you probably like this ending. But to me, it was out of place and kind of weird. This story worked incredibly well as a small-scale one. Few characters, 10 hours of gameplay, and taking place in a handful of locations. I got invested in the personal nature of these characters, not there to fulfill any world-changing role, but to simply survive and be at peace. This ending threw that out the window to me, and I get what they're going for, the powerful cosmic being that finally flourishes, but it was so out of nowhere, I was scratching my head. Not only that, but it's some doomer shit. This is a personal thing, but I fucking hate endings where the greater good is sacrificed for the sake of a close relationship. Last of Us did this and I couldn't stand it. In appealing entirely to the audience's potential attachment to these characters, I feel like the ending is hollow and kinda dismal. I came up with an idea for what I would do with Fuminori's ending. After killing Koji, him and Saya stay in the abandoned building for a week or so, living alone peacefully like they've wanted. But one day, cops investigate the area and the couple shits themselves. The cops find Fumi with Saya attached to him, and the two flee the area sprinting. Fuminori uses Koji's key to start his car and drive off. A police chase ensues, and the whole force is called to stop these two. In Fuminori's eyes, this shit looks like the red eclipse from Berserk. A dozen demons swarm him from all directions in cars. Fuminori breaks all the rules in traffic, scraping against cars and maybe hitting people. He's desperately trying to escape the horde of flesh beasts. One of the cops shoots his tire out and he smashes into a building. Bruised and bloodied, Fumi calls out to Saya in his smashed car, but she doesn't answer. He questions if she died or if she left to escape death. He starts sobbing, left hopeless, knowing that it's all over for him. The game ends with Fumi crying, with 20 demons screaming at him to step out of the vehicle and put his hands up. That would be my idea of ending it. Everything catching up to Fuminori in such a terrifying way, it would be unreal to watch. Karma would catch up to him, and it would show how one will eventually face the consequences of vile acts, and there's no way to escape them forever. But I don't know if that's actually a good idea. I was just thinking about that, like, damn, that would be fucking sick. Besides the second ending, this is almost a perfect game for what it is. Saya no Uta deserves to be known about. It's an essential horror experience, and one of the most unique pieces of literature I've ever read. That doesn't mean it's the best horror game. There's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to that, but it's definitely one of the scariest and deepest. It's crazy how in the span of 8 or so hours, you go from feeling terrified and squeamish in the flesh world to becoming accustomed to it and becoming way more scared for Koji in the real world by the end. So hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have anything to add on to my review, or have your own interpretations on something, leave it in the comments. I'd love to see some opinions. There's so much I didn't get to talk about. Lots more can be broken down, and there's mounds of great scenes I missed. Thanks so much for watching.